Last night, President Donald Trump, south of the border, issued an executive order that effectively tries to block the export of those masks from a company called 3M. They supply a significant amount of masks. We could not find out from that press conference, although the public health officials and the Prime Minister were all asked frequently how many masks exactly Canada gets from 3M, how big a supply it is compared to our other places that we source those masks. However, we have heard politicians often use, and those public health officials say, that it is a significant portion of the supply. We just don't have the exact number. I want to get some analysis right away on where this is all headed, and for that I'm joined now by Sarah Goldfeder. She's principal at Earnscliffe Strategy Group. She's with us from Ottawa. Also, again with us, Scotty Greenwood of the Canadian American Business Council. She joins us from Washington. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Scotty. Good to see you both.
Hello.
Hey, Vashi. Hey, Sarah.
Sarah, I'm going to start with you. You've been helping me behind the scenes really understand sort of the genesis of what the president has ordered. Can you help our viewers understand as well exactly what the president is dictating right now?
Sure. So the Defense Production Act is an act that the president enacted a while back to help domestic production of key items that would be needed in the response to this crisis. And so it's a wartime piece of legislation that was really constructed to ensure that the United States had everything the United States needed in case of a war, which is what this is being presented as quite frequently in the evening briefings by the White House. He's called himself a wartime president. He clearly sees this as a wartime response, which is why he's using a no-holds-barred attempt to get all of the gear and all of the different pieces of equipment and medicines that the United States needs in order to help its citizens. It's not unheard of. It's not the only country that's kind of taken these same kind of steps. The EU has done this as well. China has done this as well. Taiwan, Japan, Korea, all did similar actions to try and push back against the loss of resources at the peak of the epidemic in their countries. And so this is part of that attempt by the United States. So what it does is it requires all American companies that are operating in the United States, if they're producing items that are deemed critical to this response, it requires them to fill federal orders first.
Scotty, the message from the Prime Minister, and even we had Windsor's Mayor Drew Dilkens on, seemed to be and I'm paraphrasing here, but Sarah's exactly right. All those other countries are doing that. I think the message they're trying to send is Canada isn't all those other countries. And we heard Mayor Dilkens, for example, go over in great detail the interdependence of the healthcare communities on both sides of the border, that there are upwards of 2,000 nurses, for example, who live in Windsor, who work in healthcare facilities in Detroit. How effective might that message be when the Prime Minister is talking to the President, he says, in the coming days?
Well, it has the benefit of being true. So the economic interdependence, the lives of our countries are really intertwined. And what I would point to is I published something in Policy Options this past week that talks about not just the Defense Production Act, which Sarah quite rightly points to, the President has evoked, but there is a subsequent memorandum of understanding between Canada and the United States called the Canada-U.S. Defense Production Sharing Agreement, in which it says whatever we do, whatever the response is, we should approach it bilaterally. And I think that's really appropriate here. This crisis doesn't know boundaries, the solution or borders. The solution is not going to know a border between Canada and the United States. That whenever the vaccine comes, whenever the treatments come, it could easily be a Canadian lab, a U.S. lab, a lab somewhere else in the world. And we have to have patterns of working with each other, and we have to have trust between each other so that we can confront this together. And Vashi, you and I talked about the inputs for making certain of the personal protective equipment come from Canadian pulp and paper mills. So there are all sorts of reasons we need to work together on this and not turn inward.
Let me ask you, Sarah, to what degree do you think that message will resonate with the president? And I ask because, as you highlighted, every night he and other officials are coming out and conveying the idea that this is wartime, like the pressure on that administration to fulfill the needs of states when it comes to supply is immense right now.
Right. And so while I think, what Scotty brings up is 100% correct, it's really, really difficult to unscramble the egg here for the United States and Canada supply chains, especially as it pertains to some of this protective equipment. The reality is that the United States has acted in the United States' best interest before in ways that does not necessarily benefit Canada. We can think most recently to the 232 tariffs. And I think that there's been things that the president has done recently that I think show that he's definitely viewing this differently, I think, than necessarily a trade relationship or even the close bilateral relationship that the United States and Canada have. For example, the overture he made to CureVac on their production of a vaccine, which is a German company, and there is some precedent out there that around the world when the Australian medical company created the vaccine for H1N1, their own laws made it so that the Australian producers had to vaccinate Australians first. And so I think there is a fear that whatever happens next in this pandemic, that countries that come to solutions first will take care of their own people first, and only then will look outside their borders. We heard from the Prime Minister today that Canada understands that to some extent and is looking for domestic production, and really is facilitating a lot of companies engaging in further domestic production of this PPE and the equipment that's going to be required here. And I think that that's wise, because I think despite the bilateral relationship, Canada needs to ensure that Canadians will be serviced and get all the equipment they need.
Scotty, I have just a minute left. Actually, I want to just touch on what we also heard from the Prime Minister and from my colleague Katie, in that Katie Telford, a very significant advisor to the Prime Minister, will lean on her connections, for example, with Jared Kushner. Is the behind-the-scenes Team Canada approach the right one?
Absolutely. Behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, around the scenes, everybody has to engage at every level. Canada knows how to do this. Canada's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Hillman, knows a lot about how this has got to work. So I think that is incredibly good that she is here. But Katie Telford reaching out to Jared Kushner and others that she knows quite well from her career in public service will come in really handy, as will all of the other relationships between members of Parliament and members of Congress, members of the executive, governors, premiers. All of these things need to be brought to bear in order to get through this, and to remind the United States that even if we are on wartime footing, as we have been in the past, that the answer is, at least from a Canada-U.S. point of view, to confront the challenge together. And I think that message will resonate. I think it has to resonate.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you. Wishing you both the best of health. Thanks to Sarah Goldfeder and Scotty Greenwood.